Our readings for this week show us key turning points in the life of Jesus and of the prophets Elijah as well, and Elisha in the Old Testament. Key choices that define their lives and their futures. In the Gospel in chapter 9 in St. Luke, it's a turning point for the whole Gospel because Jesus turns for the first time resolutely, it says, towards Jerusalem and marches and walks towards Jerusalem, towards his death and towards our salvation. In the Old Testament, we see that Elijah is called to retire and to pass on his mantle to the new prophet, Elisha. And if we read the second reading today, it seems to me that St. Paul's words give us the key and central theme of this week's readings. Galatians chapter 5, verse 1. It is for freedom that Christ has set you free. Stand firm then, and do not let yourselves be burdened again with the yoke of slavery. What is freedom? Our 21st century vision of freedom is often very different to what freedom would have been for somebody living in the biblical times. And of course today, freedom means for us to be autonomous, to do what I want to do, to make my choices, to live my life, to live my dream, which is fine. But in the Old Testament we see that freedom is very different. The book of Exodus is very centered on the theme of freedom, and often it's portrayed very one-dimensionally as being a political freedom, a freedom from the yoke of slavery, which is a good thing, freedom from slavery. But if you read the text carefully, in the Old Testament, in the book of Exodus, we see that it's a freedom from slavery to be close to God in adoration. God wants them to be free, gives them the means of freedom, but what do you do with that freedom? John Paul II, the first time he arrived in the USA, coming down the steps from the plane, met Ronald Reagan, who said to him, "Welcome, Your Holiness, to the land of the free and the brave." And John Paul II said, "Thank you. Yes, free, but free for what?" So we're free, we have lots of freedoms today in our world, but what do we do with those freedoms? St. Paul, when he writes his letters, he always introduces himself as being Paul, the one who is called, as if to show that he's not his own man. His calling comes from, he's following another person is inspiring him and leading him. And Mary, in the Gospel of Luke, introduced herself as being the handmaid of the Lord, the slave of the Lord, the one who is dependent on him. And so we see that to be free in our world today has become like an absolute, whereas freedom is totally dependent on how we love. How we love defines how free we are. The more we love, the more we are free. And that's why St. Bernard says of Mary, the Virgin Mary, he says, she was the freest human being that ever lived. Her yes was the greatest human choice, and the freest human choice that ever lived. Why? Because of her great love, the intensity of her love. To come back to the first reading, we see that Elijah is called by God to retire. Time is up. You have to call another person. So Elijah approaches Elisha, who was working in the fields with 12 oxen, which meant he was very well off in those days. A very wealthy man, and had a lot to lose by becoming a prophet, at least materially. So Elijah puts his mantle on him, a sign that he is the new prophet. And Elisha lets go of everything. He lets go of his oxen, he lets go of his property, his business, his job, his family, and follows Elijah to become the prophet. Now, the Gospels and the readings today are meant to take us by the lapel, so to speak, and compelling us to name our priorities. What's the center of your life? How can I use my life for the glory of God? And recently I was a witness to a little conversation between two people. One person was very stressed, so to speak, and tired. And the other person, her friend, was trying to invite her to have a deeper prayer life, more time for God. And she said, I'm too busy, I'm too stressed, I don't have time. And the answer her friend gave struck me and struck that person as well as being very incisive. It said, you're trying to fit God into your life. Instead, you should be trying to make your life revolve around God. So today's readings are calling us to be free. They're calling us to recenter our life around God and to let Him guide and lead us, and so to experience true gospel freedom, the freedom of the children of God.